After dark on the 24th of February 2025. Get that right, 24th of the 2nd, 2025. I had a good productive day today. I achieved one of my goals. I need the stuff delivered and it was difficult and I got it done, but a bit of effort, but anyway, very good. The weather is, now it's wet and cold. Now, if you imagine in rural Ireland tonight, it's about 4 degrees. There's a dirty old wind blowing from the west, northwest. The showers comes on every hour or so and they last about 15 minutes. The ground is very wet and you imagine a war. And while the Ukraine is not the same, it's not that different either, or any European battlefield. So can you imagine if you're a soldier there and you're trying to do something and you get shot in the thigh with a big lump of a rifle and you're knocked to the ground and it feels like a ton hit you and you feel the heat of it and all that, and the bullet goes out the other side and there you are on the ground and maybe your radio not working and maybe your mates are winning a battle and they can't come to your aid and your insides are spilling out and it's cold and it gets cold and you feel the temperature of your body going down as the blood leaves you and you need medical assistance and it may come or it may not. Well, that is the scenario that played out for at least 800 people in Ukraine, maybe about 800,000 people in Ukraine, maybe about 200,000 Russians and 600,000 Ukrainians and probably about 6,000 mercenaries or international fighters on the Ukraine side, mostly in the situation so far. And when you look at it like that, committing to any war or anything like that is something must be done in the very last resort. What I believe you have happening is, in the world you have about 43% of the American people are Democratic supporters and go along with the idea of the Democratic Party, and the other 55%, I have a cat here, sorry, are Republican supporters, but some of them are actually pro the Democrat stance as well. Now, in Europe, it's 100% woke, left, cultural Marxist, and they are experts at lecturing. And don't forget, there was a Minsk agreement, there was a Minsk II agreement, and all of those agreements were broke. Now, the EU pushes it across, as does the BBC and RTE. Don't forget, Russia invaded Ukraine. That's the point. Well, that sets the clock at a particular time on the 24th of February 2022 and says that's it, that's the beginning. Of course, nothing on this earth is without a history. And you can go back 200 years to the Crimean War and all that if you want to. But even to go back a short while, you realise that to 2008 or thereabouts, there were these two agreements. I have told you, I have spoken to people who witnessed the murder of Russians in the town of Odessa. We know that the Zelensky predecessors, and Zelensky had no problem with it, murder Russians out of the face, and they hate Russians who have reason to be there. Maybe the way they got there is a bit like the Unionists in the north or whatever, but at this stage they weren't hobbling or getting in the way of a successful Ukrainian existence and economy. Implicit in the Minsk agreement was that Ukraine would be independent, that it would not have Nazi or military leanings, that it would leave the Russians alone, that there might be some representation for them from the Russian government for them, the same way as the Good Friday Agreement was an excellent blueprint for this situation. And above all, Ukraine could exploit its resources and start trading with the rest of the world, going on in peace forevermore. But that would have done the Russians. That's what the Russians were happy with prior to 2014. But then it became apparent that BlackRock developments and Vanguard and big finance houses, mainly based in America, that have gutted my community here with their windmills, have had other designs. They wanted the resources of the Ukraine for their balance sheets and their big companies, and they wanted Russia's resources. They wanted to control Ukraine, and they wanted Putin overthrown. They knew Putin wouldn't cave into them. They wanted a puppet government in Russia. And so it got to the stage where there was no point in Putin talking. And he annexed the Crimea. Now, at that stage, there was 2 years from that happened until Trump took over. But if something had to be done, maybe he might have capitulated. It's very doubtful. But that should have been a clear warning. He says there was a majority in favour of Russian rule in Crimea. But that should have been fair warning that this lad was not joking. And if you're going to take him on, you needed to know you were talking about the scenario I've painted. You're talking about the blood, sweat and tears on the field with rain, freezing and no one to pick you up as you die. So then the West decided they'd fight this war to the last Ukrainian soldier. It didn't matter to them how many died. We know it's a lot. There was no factoring in of the death and destruction and the hardship and the impact on countries like Ireland from a mass refugee crisis from the Ukraine. Nothing was factored in. It was plough on. We're right. We're right. Then, about a month and a half or 2 months after the invasion, Zelensky began to sense, maybe with some help from his own advisors, he began to sense that Putin was not joking and that he was facing a long, belligerent war of attrition in the ditches, in the rivers, in the fields, in the woods. And even he might have realised that it was going to be a tough slog. Communication with Russia was made, and there was a chance of building on it. But Boris Johnson, the failed British Prime Minister, flew in and stopped them. And that's where the real statesmanship in Zelensky was needed. A good Ukrainian statesman would not have listened to him. Next came Victoria Nuland, who was the one that provoked the colour revolution of 2014. She represented the deep state that Biden's Democratic Party represented and had been up to this month trying to unsettle the Georgian government and to create a revolution against the lawfully elected government of Georgia, which is not a puppet state of Russia, but knows it will not be able to exist in conflict with Russia. Russia will let Georgia alone. It can do what it likes, but it mustn't threaten Russia. Georgia wants to join the European Union, and Putin has not particularly said he has any problem with that. The European Union is seen more as a trading bloc. But of course, you know, and I know, it's a political bloc, and fastly becoming a military bloc. So I don't know how that will go. The next thing was the Victoria Nuland, Johnson came in, and then the two Biden Secretaries of State, Blinken and Sullivan, came in, and they told them, we'll back you, never give in. But what was the weight behind the European and the Blinken and all of them? In other words, 45% of America and all of Europe. They could have assessed easily that they'll never whack the Russians, that the Russians are a belligerent, tough army with all kinds of weapons and some of the most advanced high-speed weapons, Oreskes or something, I can't think of the name of it now, please forgive me for that. But that the Russians just wanted to security within their own borders. And that if Russia was played right, they would supply the fuel, the energy and the resources for a thriving Russian, a thriving European, a thriving Ukraine economy. a challenge to the United States economy. America blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, as Jeffrey Sachs told the European Parliament today. America blew it up. It wasn't the Russians. The Russians did not cut off the gas. It's Zelensky cut off the gas to Europe, flowing through Ukraine. So then they realised that Trump was coming down the road. You know my stance on Trump. I've been watching him a long time. But they assumed the American people would never elect him. They assumed that the rigging of the election in 2020 would happen again. But this time, Trump and his staff were ready, and Elon Musk was ready. And the whole plan of the deep state was to rig the election. But they were one step ahead. There were even people in every count centre with documents ready to go to court. And every effort was tried by the deep state and by the Democrats to keep Trump out. But he had the overwhelming support of the people. He won the popular vote and the electoral college vote. So where does that leave the situation? He takes a different view. Many of my viewers here may not agree. He always said, wouldn't it be nice if we could get along? The plan B now is that while Europe shouts, oh, Russia invaded Ukraine, we can't give in, Ukraine are running out, Ukraine are losing the war and have it lost. Only a few straggling places left. Ukrainian soldiers are stuck in Kursk, inside of Russia, in Kursk. So to be a bit like if Wales was Ukraine and they had troops in Coventry from Wales. But we'll watch this space. It's my opinion they're going to be cut off and slaughtered, put into a cauldron. They're going to be slaughtered. And that'll finish their Ukraine sortie into Russia. Are you with me on that? So now, Starmer, Europe, Macron, and the Germans, all with failing economies and all under severe pressure at home, are blindsided. They thought that there'd be some moves that they might be persuaded by Trump to go and have a wee talk with Russia, and Trump just bypassed the whole lot of them and told them, keep out of my way. And this is causing unbelievable heartache and misery within Europe, and I say bloody good job too. Nobody is delighted as much as me. Thank God it's great. So the next thing is, rather than saying, well, right, we'll see what comes out of it, or instead of saying, right, well, if President Trump is going to sit down with Putin, we'll bomb America. If they didn't want it, why didn't they threaten him? Well, he has 35,000 troops stationed in Europe, mostly in Germany. So they couldn't do that. So their plan B wasn't that. The minute they heard of the talks and that there had already been talks and more planned, the plan of Macron and Starmer was, we will have troops in there. They didn't ask anyone could they put them in. They were going to put them in there. They weren't going to be sidelined. And they felt it was preposterous that they weren't consulted. They had a positive approach. We're going to have our troops in there and they were going to be relevant again. Of course, it doesn't take any much intelligence to realise that if Britain and France got their troops into Ukraine, they're members of NATO. Now, the next thing would be, where does NATO stand? Their plan was that they could trigger Article 5 of NATO, forcing the Americans to come into the war on the side of Ukraine against Russia. Zelensky, who has no authority at all, has agreed to give up his position if Ukraine can become a member of NATO. What a stupid, stupid idea. Ukraine will not be allowed to be a member of NATO, no matter who's in charge. And he thinks that if he gives an olive branch and says, right, I'll step down, I've done me bit, I'll go off and live in Switzerland with all my riches that I've screwed out of the Americans, that we can then let NATO take over Ukraine and that'll fix the problem. Of course, that would mean outright war between Russia and NATO, and even with the Americans, Russia would win. It's 4,000 miles from America. The thought Trump was going to fall for that. I don't think even Biden would have fallen for that, or his advisors. They thought it and they still think it. Now, I didn't see the press conference between Trump and Macron today. We'll look at it later. I didn't see I don't know what's going to happen with Macron, with Starmer tomorrow either. But we know what they want. They want the Americans to back up their crazy initiatives. Just like when Napoleon was being beaten at the Battle of Waterloo and was beaten, if he had to have an American army to come in and tackle the British with him, he might have won. But Trump knows what that means. Why should he engage in a war with the Russians over a principle of Ursula von der Leyen and Fancy Pants Macron and Communist Starmer, who sent 100 people over to Michigan to put Trump and keep Trump out? Why should he engage in that? He sees the European Union as an unelected irrelevancy. He sees the woke, cultural Marxist mass migration agenda of the Europeans as a disaster. The idea that he should commit his troops and his armies and all, and his money, to defending that way of life is anathema to him. The Russian way of life does not put teachers in jail for calling it by him. And so I would be very surprised if Trump changes. I think Trump will tell them, you do it my way or you don't do it at all. Trump is already negotiating with Ukraine for its raw materials. So it looks like he's going to try and strike a deal. We'll help you somewhat, but we have to get those. And he's right on that, because while it kind of conflicts with what I've said about BlackRock taking all the resources, you could still have a situation where Trump would put money and effort to save Ukraine and at least keep a rump state of the remainder of the Ukraine, and maybe save Odessa from the Russians and let the Russians have the bit they have and leave it like that and put effort into that. Well, if he's going to do that, the cream and the goodies have to come to his country. He is, after all, American first president. Imagine if he did all that and some European consortium or some Canadian consortium or some Australian consortium or some Chinese consortium came in and took the cream and took all those resources. He's not going to let that happen. They can't have it two ways. This is normal commerce, normal wheeling and dealing. As a farmer that buys cattle and tractors and things like that, we do this all the time. But the European Union, because it's unelected, has no politicians that understand that simple thing. There's nothing for nothing. They are deluded. They think they're going to win the war. They think they're going to call the shots. The French have lost the African continent. They'll soon have nothing. And there's talk now that Intel is leaving Ireland. There's talk that the quality of the electricity supply in Ireland is poor and it's going to be abandoned for doing microchips and all that stuff. That's talk I hear on good authority, but we'll come there again. And so this is the reality. The bottom line is Trump is highly popular. He's doing a good job in America and he has the support of the people. There has been an election in Germany. The proper outcome is the Conservatives, it's the CDU, the CSU, and ADF to form a coalition with a majority. And that's what would happen. The ADF is no different to Trump's Republican Party, but they won't do that. So when they're that belligerent and they won't do that, then let them out. Let them off with their military. Let Starmer put his 20,000 British troops. He has only 70. I think he'd raise about 10. Let Germany put their troops. They'd raise about 10,000 as well. That's 20,000. And France might raise 8 or 9,000. And they need 3 times that amount, because you need one batch at home, one batch going, and one batch coming back. So the total commitment there would be, what I say there, 10, 20, 30,000, 33, 30s, 90,000. Let's see how that goes. Let's see how the Poles go along with it. Let's see what they'll do. In with them into Ukraine. The minute the Russians get them in, they'll declare war on them. This is worse than the Ukrainians, because the Russians have no alignment with NATO members, but they would have a wee bit with the Slavic peoples of the Ukraine, and they'll mow them out of it. They'll bring in helicopter gunships and machine gun the daylights out of them. They'll put 50 or 60,000 tons of lead and copper in bullets down on top of them. They'll hit them with these new missiles they have, and the Europeans will call up Trump and say, come over quick. Nobody's going to come. And then the Europeans will have to take the political consequences of the body bags and the deaths. And when it's all over, they'll have lost all. And Russia will have the whole Ukraine. Trump will not get the goodies he wanted, and he'll be angry, and the whole thing will be over anyway. And the map of Europe will be drawn to put Ukraine into Russia. That's what they're going to do if they can. But Trump knows that the most best policy is to let Russia have the bit they have. And this idea that letting Russia have what they have is some way capitulating is cowards talk, because they cannot beat Russia. But they want the American soldier, the chap from Idaho, the chap from California, the chap from Missouri, fully armed in there in the muck. And then they'll say they're brave people. Bravery does not include dishonesty, injustice, and stupidity. I think that we'll see what I'm saying happening. There'll be a settlement worked out. The Europeans will hum and ho. And I think that you'll see the whole industry being sucked out of Europe. You'll see the whole place destroyed. Maybe that's a bit excessive, and I do accept I can't predict it to that far. But I'd say they'll back down. They're only windbags in the end of the day. Trump is a statesman, a tough man, and he's going to get what he can for his country. And he knows that the Europeans are no good. All they have is fight climate change. Oh, a big hatchet, fight climate change. They'll soon find out that all you can do to fight climate change is get a stick or a hatchet or an axe and hit the air. It's a futile, sickening ideology that has crippled them. Stupid ideology. And that has men in women's sports. What kind of a soldier would fight to see a fully grown man boxing a woman in a boxing ring in France in the Olympics? Do you think anyone is going to go out on the battlefield and fight to preserve that? Meanwhile, up in Maine, the governor woman of Maine has defied Trump, the only one of the 50 states. She says she's going to have the men and women's sports. And Trump told her personally the other day, I'll cut every bit of funding from your state. You'll get not one penny of federal funding. So we'll watch this space and I'll report to you in due course. He had no problem confronting her. The way he confronted her was very like the way I confront bullies. I know how to stand up to them. I know how they capitulate. And that she will probably capitulate, and if she doesn't, he'll destroy her. That's what the job he has. That's what he worked so hard to get his hands on that power. He braved the whole lot of them and he got there. And he has my support 100%. I hope he succeeds. I do have wee reservations about his policy on Gaza, and I think that will be sorted yet. I don't think he's going to annihilate the whole population of Gaza, and I would hope he won't. I don't think he will. I think it's a hard one to crack, not easy for him to do, and he may not do it. But he'll fix the Ukraine good. What is it anyway? Only a few old forests and trees and a few farms. Cows, a few goats. What is it? Well, that's the situation, folks, in 25 minutes. I hope that makes it clear. I hope that answers all your questions and you see my view on it. But the thing is, whether my viewers like it or not, I can tell you, in my honest opinion, this is what's going to happen. Right, wrong, or indifferent. And it's not communism, definitely. It's something like imperialism or some type of thing. But this is common sense. Oh, it's great. It's like the fella in the mart buying for somebody that had given money to buy cattle, and you go in and you try and buy a few, and he has his hand in someone else's pocket. The EU thought they had their hand in the American pocket. They thought they could expend all the young men in Ukraine and destroy Ukraine and get all killed to try vainly to beat Russia. And when it becomes obvious, and they still haven't admitted that Russia is winning and has won, they then think they can turn to the United States with not only its mighty armies and militias and hardware, also to its young men and women. That the people of America don't value the lives of their young men and women in the military just as much as the people of Germany, Britain or France. And that's a big mistake. For while the American would fight very bravely and lay down his life, and has done it before, to keep the balance of power in Europe and the world, they won't fight for the woke, left-wing head cases that is represented by Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission, totally unelected, Keir Starmer, with people in prison for speaking their mind, our boy here, Micheál Martin, with Enoch Burke tortured for speaking his mind, and the same, only more to come. They hopefully will be crushed. Crushed. The voters won't change their mind. They'll still vote for them. But it makes no difference. The voters' children will be conscripted up, as it has been recommended in England, and will be forced into the meat grinder, into the Ukraine, the same as the Ukrainians were. And that'll happen because the Americans will not be there to do it. And that is a cruel, hard thing. On a cold night like this, in a year's time, that's what could be happening in all those places in Ukraine with the funny names that we can't fully understand. Good luck. Comment underneath. Bye bye. Thank you very much.